a female ice skater suddenly spotted a motionless face beneath the thick ice. Just seconds later, the ice shattered, pulling her down beside the body. When police pulled the body out, they discovered the victim's face had also been smeared with anthracite, just like in the cult murder case 30 years earlier. In 1994, a horrific murder occurred in a small village in the Alps. A 19-year-old girl was found dead in the wilderness, her face smeared with anthracite. All the evidence pointed to Caleb, the leader of the local cult called Eccentric. However, when police arrived to arrest him, he calmly walked out of his house. Suddenly, blood gushed from his mouth and he collapsed. 12 other bodies were found in his house. The spilled glasses on the floor clearly indicated they had all drunk poison. Caleb was the sole survivor at the scene. For over 30 years, he has remained silent. What happened in that house remains a mystery. Journalist Solal yearned to uncover the truth. Why had such a horrific tragedy befallen a peaceful village? He gathered every lead related to the case, but as his investigation neared its end, he was attacked by a stranger in his garage. He only managed to leave a final message to his daughter, Ida, over the phone, that she absolutely must not contact him. Following his phone call, she traveled to the village in the Alps. In a file he had left behind at the hotel, she found a photograph of a man called Scum. She Googled his name and discovered it was Jaro, an ophthalmologist who had practiced in Paris. He had been convicted of drug trafficking and demoted to a janitor. He then became the manager of the snowmobiles in the village. His marriage had fallen apart. The snowmobile shop was a place where people with criminal records could reintegrate into society. Jaro's current situation was that of a suspended sentence. Ida recounted all of this, but he remained unresponsive. Reluctantly, she had to think of another way. Unaware that a pair of eyes were watching her intently, she didn't give up. She hired a beautiful girl to pretend to have lost her skateboard so that Jaro would lead her into the woods. The girl used every trick to seduce him, but he remained completely uninterested. Angry, the girl left and called Ida to complain. Suddenly, a strange noise echoed through the woods. As she turned around, someone covered her mouth from behind. That night, Jaro returned home to find the sheep in his backyard attacked by wild wolves. This was the third time this year. His uncle and aunt were extremely worried. He went back to his room and glanced at Juliet's new name, the woman living with him. He looked at pictures of his daughter on his phone. He called his ex-wife but was refused because she had won custody. Even speaking to his daughter was difficult. Ida returned to the hotel, exhausted. She took off her wig, revealing her real hair, which had fallen out. While she was resting, a file fell out, revealing a key she hadn't noticed before. She took a picture of it to send to a friend for reference when the hotel phone rang. A deep voice on the other end said, "Solal, you should have brought Jaro to see me." The next morning, the police brought Jaro to the station. A female officer named Gio was assigned to monitor his behavior. The day before, a girl named Emma had mysteriously disappeared. Jaro was the last person to see her. The police considered him the prime suspect. At this point, Ida lied, saying she had seen Emma leave with someone else. This is how Jaro was acquitted. Ida asked Jaro to help her find her father. The person who called her the day before was Caleb, who had been imprisoned for 30 years. Ida tracked the location to a mental hospital in the village. Jaro couldn't believe it. He thought Ida had a mental problem. He protested vehemently, but she subdued him with a taser. When he regained consciousness, the car was already halfway there. Fearing he would resist, Ida tied his hands in the car. She threatened that if he didn't cooperate, she would go to the police station, retract her statement, and make him a suspect again. The police wouldn't believe Jaro's excuses. Despite her husband Gio's pleas, the police officer decided to go find clues about Emma herself. On the mountain, there was a quarry with its entrance completely covered in snow. Nearby were two people wearing yellow protective suits. Gio was about to chase after them when the mountain suddenly shook violently. She turned around, and the two had vanished without a trace. Ida finally managed to get Jaro to the psychiatric hospital. Caleb was confined to a special room on the second floor. Only the head nurse was allowed in. He told Ida that he couldn't help her find her father and that she had to be cured first. Only then did she learn that her father had met him. But he said nothing, instead turning to Jaro and telling him that the fire that had consumed Juliet was still burning. Jaro was the son of the chosen one. If he wanted to live, he had to use true light to fight the darkness. Otherwise, that fire would consume him and the only person he loved. This conversation only worsened Jaro's psychological trauma. He remembered the fire from years ago. The hallway was filled with smoke. His mother was engulfed in flames. It was a scene that haunted him for life. At the same time, a tourist was ice skating on the lake and felt something unusual beneath the ice. She looked closely and saw a body underneath. Suddenly, she slipped, causing the ice to break and her to fall into the body. By the time Gio arrived, the tourist was safe. The body was Emma, who had gone missing the day before. Her face was also smeared with anthracite. This detail was similar to the case of the 19-year-old girl who died in 1994. It turned out that the earthquake yesterday afternoon was due to the Acacia research in the village being allowed to reopen the mine. They may have used explosives there to cause the earthquake. Jaro, Inyo and Romeo attended an outdoor party. This was the same location where the eccentric cult had been involved in the incident. Everyone attending had to smear half their face with anthracite for purification. At this moment, Dr. Guion sent a voice message advising Ida to continue treatment. Over a decade ago, she was diagnosed with leukemia and had to live long-term in the hospital's monitoring room. Her father visited her every night and even prepared a computer so she could video call. Even alone, she could still talk to her father or connect with people all over the world. But now, the father who had loved her so much had suddenly disappeared. Her friend sent a message saying they had investigated and found a key belonging to a clothing brand from 1980. By 1990, it had been bought by a French company. The parking lot in the village was the property of this company. Ida used the key to open garage number 113. This was where her father had converted it into a workshop. Inside were documents about the case from the past 30 years. On the floor was a box of videotapes with the name Juliet on it. This caught Ida's attention. Early the next morning, Ida called Jaro. The anthracite he had applied to his face the night before hadn't been washed off yet. After watching his mother's video, he came to his senses. The 19-year-old girl who died in 1994 was Roxane, Juliet's best friend. She was the one who introduced Juliet to the eccentric cult. Any woman who met Caleb would fall in love with him. Neither Solal nor Juliet believed Caleb was responsible for Roxane's death. The mass poisoning incident that year was also unrelated to him. Suddenly, the room exploded. The flames almost engulfed everything around. The fire stimulated Jaro's nerves, plunging him into traumatic childhood memories from which he couldn't escape. Luckily, Ida pulled him out of the room. No one noticed that not far away, a figure in a black cloak was watching the chaotic hotel with his head held high. In the deep forest, Solal tried to escape. The sound of footsteps echoed behind him. While dodging, he unfortunately slipped and fell, hitting his head on a rock by the roadside and losing consciousness. When he woke up, more than half of his left leg had been amputated. He groaned in pain, but there was no response from the small shack. The fire had been successfully extinguished. Romeo went to check on Jaro's wounds. Ida compiled the clues she had gathered. Both Roxane and Emma had anthracite smeared on their faces. This proved that the culprit from 30 years ago was still at large. Jaro's mother and Ida's father, who had been taken away, had something in common. They had both realized that Caleb wasn't the real mastermind. Now, the killer in the shadows had lost patience and attacked Jaro and Ida. Did this also prove that they were getting closer to the truth? Ida dared to reveal so much to Romeo because she had investigated his background. He was once a famous motorcycle racer, having won many championships. Until 2016, he was seriously injured in an accident and ended his professional career. His family all lived in this village, and Officer Gio was his older sister. Everyone checked the tapes in the workshop. Among them was an interview with Juliet mentioning the legend of the Black Virgin. The miners said she often appeared when disaster was imminent or when a lover was about to die. Every night, Juliet felt the presence of the Black Virgin in her room. She couldn't move, couldn't even breathe, couldn't do anything at all. Solal also had a tape recording of the special police raid on the eccentric cult in 1994. The news report said 12 bodies were found, but they never announced that there was a boy named Mani who survived. The police officer in charge of the case at the time, Dennis, checked the DNA of the eccentric cult members, but none matched Mani. Mani's adoptive parents were lucky to escape the mass poisoning, but a series of recent strange occurrences may all be related to them. Ida suddenly felt short of breath and was taken to the hospital. Just then, Jaro received a call from his daughter asking if they could meet for his birthday this year. His ex-wife was touched by her daughter's affection for her father. Her perception of Jaro gradually changed. At the psychiatric hospital, Caleb clenched his right hand and repeatedly punched himself in the chest. All the patients seemed affected. They all smeared anthracite on their faces and imitated Caleb's actions. When the nurses burst into the room, everything was back to normal. Caleb sat perfectly still on his bed, as if nothing had happened. Jaro asked his aunt about the eccentric cult. It turned out that Caleb had used the guise of healing to recruit followers. There were even rumors that many incurable diseases had been cured. Most of the villagers had been to the cult. Juliet, on her first visit, was immediately captivated and couldn't leave. When Jaro arrived home, his aunt frantically stopped their car. She said someone was rummaging through Juliet's room. Jaro chased after them, but only caught a glimpse of a creature in a black cloak disappearing into the darkness. At Gio's house, her mother-in-law used the excuse of visiting her grandchild to scold her daughter-in-law for only caring about the case and not paying any attention to her husband. Her mother-in-law also brought up what happened 6 months ago. Their relationship, already strained, became even more tense. She suddenly fell into a heavy mood, staring thoughtfully at the pile of baby clothes in the storage room. She had been pregnant with her second child, but unfortunately Unfortunately, the pregnancy ended in the 5th month. Afterward, she fell into depression. It took her 6 months to return to work at the police station. Her husband was indifferent, her mother-in-law unsympathetic. Would this life ever end? Finally, Emma's autopsy results came back. There were ligature marks on her wrists, but no scratches on her body. It seemed she had escaped into the forest, been caught, and thrown into the lake. A biochip, shaped like a stone, was implanted behind her neck. When the chip was removed, all the data on Emma's phone was immediately erased. The symbol on the chip belonged to the Acacia Research Institute, located behind the mountain in the village. Many locals believe that their experiments and overexploitation have damaged the ecosystem. Along the way, protest banners were everywhere. The head of the Acacia Research Institute was very mysterious and had never publicly appeared. He was backed by the government. Even if the police had an investigation warrant, the receptionist could refuse them entry to search. However, the Acacia Research Institute also provided clues that Emma had participated in a clinical trial. At the same time, the police discovered Jaro's DNA on Emma's body. The investigation into Mani also yielded results. Ida sent Jaro a photo, asking him and Romeo to go to Officer Dennis to verify the information. Just as they arrived, a gunshot rang out. A person fell to the ground. Dennis was hiding in the attic, muttering curses. When Gio arrived at the scene, Dennis calmed down and said that he had been watching TV at home when he saw the goat-headed man outside the window. The nurse went out to check and was attacked. Therefore, Dennis was forced to draw his gun in self-defense. Jaro showed the photo. Dennis immediately became agitated and insisted that the person in the photo had attacked him. The three immediately went to the hospital to inquire about the origin of the photo. Ida said her friend had extracted the audio from Mani's old tape. The boy was singing a song originating from a small town. Following that, they learned that Mani's father was the man in the photo, named Vasily, an extremely superstitious man. He had secretly taken Mani to the Ekran's cult. Vasily was Caleb's 13th follower. Ida suspected that he was the culprit behind both murders, which occurred 30 years apart. He would surely act again. The traditional village festival was about to begin. The killer would surely blend into the crowd. The three of them blended into the crowd, waiting for him to reveal himself. Ida even went on stage to grab the microphone to attract the killer's attention. Jaro's ex-wife wanted to reconcile, so she specifically brought their daughter back to the village to meet him, but she inadvertently let her daughter be seen. Jaro was forced to tell her to quickly take the child and hide. He and the police successfully apprehended the goat-headed man. It turned out to be Dennis. He still held a poison pill in his hand. Just then, everyone started spitting blood. Dennis seized the opportunity to escape. It wasn't until midnight that the police found Dennis at the Ekran's cult's gathering place. He had smashed a wolf's head against the wall in the living room and retrieved the human head hidden inside. It was Vasily. The events began in 1994. Dennis had investigated the Ekran's cult, but he suffered from amnesia. Caleb claimed that if Vasily evolved, the era would be saved, so Dennis killed Vasily with a rock. Afterward, fearing exposure, he poisoned the Ekran's water tank. For 30 years, he had been haunted by a simple psychological ghost. The so-called seeing of the goat-headed man was just a hallucination. Dennis mistakenly believed the villagers knew about his despicable act, so he secretly put poison in the drinks at the party. But the real killer was not as he claimed. He spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. The final image stops at the poison nearby. Ultimately, he had to pay for his crimes. For him, perhaps it was also a form of liberation. The suspect in the case had unexpectedly died, so Gio had to take all the responsibility. Her husband not only didn't support her, but also requested her transfer to another village. The reason was that her depression hadn't recovered, yet she stubbornly continued working on unimportant cases. She had become a different person. She replied that she hadn't changed, it was just that he no longer trusted her. Jaro arrived home very late, by which time his ex-wife had already left with their daughter. When he called, she didn't answer. After the hotel fire, Ida had nowhere to stay, so she temporarily moved to Jaro's house. While she was cleaning the room, Jaro's uncle gave her a music player. Inside were many recordings of Juliet's conversations with him, a small memento for Jaro. Ida paid close attention to the room's decor, but she struggled for over half an hour and still wasn't satisfied. Finally, she moved in to share a room with Jaro. That night, they talked a lot. Their feelings for each other gradually blossomed in the gentle darkness. Jaro's ex-wife, Anais, took their daughter to stay at a hotel in the village. She didn't realize a car was silently following them. The next morning, as they were preparing to check out, her daughter Malia, who was playing outside, suddenly disappeared. She heard her daughter's screams and chased after her, only to find strange symbols on her daughter's forehead. The little girl cried and said she had seen a monster. Upon receiving the news, Jaro immediately rushed to the scene. Anais drew the symbols on paper and gave them to him. Because his daughter had almost been in danger, Jaro worried they might be in danger on their way back to Paris, so he arranged for them to stay temporarily at a friend's house. To find the real culprit, he returned to the workshop shop to review the surveillance footage and called in for leave. At that moment, a menacing man arrived at the ski shop, seemingly seeking revenge on Jaro. Romeo had to tell his dog to chase him away. Soon after, the dog ran back into the house. Romeo followed it to the back of the mountain. The dog growled and whimpered. It had been shot and was seriously wounded. Dr. Harry stitched up the wound. The bullet was small, definitely a handgun bullet. However, the attacker had no connection to the case in the village. The man was Jaro's enemy from his time in Paris. Recently, he had seen Jaro's picture in the news and had traveled all the way here to seek revenge. Jaro mentioned a videotape recorded by a journalist at the Roxanne Memorial Service in 1994. In it, a woman named Detraz, wearing a hoodie and with a birthmark on her face, was seen talking to Juliet. Soon after, Juliet was stabbed at the party, and a strange symbol was visible in the mirror. Detraz, with blood on her hands, was hiding in a corner, gasping for breath. Jaro intended to give this lead to Ida, but he was summoned to the police station. The reason was that his DNA was found on Emma's body, but that was because they were intimate before Emma died. The police had no other evidence, so they only asked a few questions and let him go. On his way out of the police station, he happened to see two officers organizing files, but in that moment of distraction, he secretly obtained some information about Detraz. She was indeed a girl with a birthmark on her face. The necklace she wore was exactly the same as the symbol drawn on his daughter's forehead. Detraz lived in seclusion on a mountain farm, rarely interacting with outsiders. Romeo happened to learn about her artwork. The two of them drove to the farm, but Jaro's enemies also appeared, chasing after them and recklessly ramming their car down the mountainside. Despite their attempts to speed up, they couldn't escape. The car overturned down the slope. Luckily, they only suffered minor injuries. The enemies continued to pursue them relentlessly. Jaro and Romeo had to flee into the deep forest and inadvertently entered Detraz's farm. Ida's father was also lying in a room on the second floor, one of his legs amputated. Meanwhile, Ida sneaked into Dennis's house and found a design blueprint and some graffiti on the buildings. It was easy to trace the source to a construction company that had left an unfinished building in the village. The graffiti in the picture was located right there. Hearing a noise outside, Ida cautiously grabbed her taser. Unexpectedly, the person in front of her was Gio. She was also investigating Dennis and discovered he had bought an apartment in the unfinished building. The two decided to cooperate. On the way, Ida revealed that because she couldn't find a suitable bone marrow donor, her condition was worsening and chemotherapy was becoming less effective. Her father's persistent investigation of the 30-year-old case was likely also to find a suitable bone marrow donor for her. Just as she finished speaking, they arrived at the building, which looked exactly like the picture. Inside, it was covered in graffiti in various styles. Dennis's room was number 134, containing a few basic items. The walls were densely covered with mathematical formulas, indicating that someone had once lived there. Ida pulled back the tattered curtains, just as she saw a park ranger walking past. He said an avalanche had just occurred 200 meters away, and that strangers were forbidden from approaching. But Ida, with her keen senses, realized he was lying. She immediately pulled out her taser and knocked him unconscious. There was no avalanche ahead, but a yellow canvas tent. As soon as they entered, they were met with a strong, foul stench. On the ground lay dozens of slaughtered sheep carcasses. Suddenly, both of them felt dizzy. Their bodies went limp and they collapsed. Before losing consciousness, they managed to see several people in yellow protective suits enter. At the same time, Jaro and Romeo were preparing to take the journalist away when Detraz appeared from behind, holding a hunting rifle. But she didn't shoot. Instead, she turned the gun on Jaro's enemies. She had no ill will towards the two intruders. Only then did Jaro dare ask why she had drawn the symbol on his daughter's forehead. It turned out that what happened 30 years ago was just a misunderstanding. Detraz didn't attack Juliet. On the contrary, she noticed Juliet's unusual behavior and wanted to ask for clarification. Unexpectedly, Juliet slipped and fell into her, then used a sprig of parsley to burn her stomach. That's why she drew the purification symbol on the mirror. She accidentally met Solal in the forest and brought him back to save her. She only wanted to help the village avoid evil, but no one believed her. The real creator of evil was hiding in the quarry. He had hundreds of faces. To deal with him, they had to trace back to the source of evil, and the key person was Caleb. At the mental hospital, they monitored patients taking their medication every day. This time, Caleb used his followers to deceive people and hide the medicine. At night, he punched himself in the chest. The head nurse, 4, came to give him a sedative injection, but he was attacked by his followers. He said that the two sisters must be destroyed. Gio was carried away on a stretcher. In her delirium, she saw the boy Mani from years ago, but when she woke up, she was in her car. The golden tent had vanished. Everything that had happened before wasn't an illusion. Someone was trying to cover their tracks. Jaro sent news that they had taken Solal to the hospital for treatment. Ida stayed by her father's bedside, hoping he would wake wake up soon. They had extracted a caliber 12 bullet from his body. Demons don't need hunting weapons, so the shooter must be a human. Roxane's sudden death, Juliet's self-immolation, and the wounds on Emma's body all prove that the strange events of the past 30 years were caused by humans. So who was the real culprit behind it all? Dietrich seemed to have anticipated the police's arrival, so she left the farm early, leaving only Jaro's enemy unconscious. Geo reviews records spanning 30 years and discovers that Dennis reported Mani dead in 2006. She suspects Dennis forged the death certificate. All the strange events occurring in this small town are connected to the Arcacia Research Institute. The key to solving all the mysteries lies in Mani's true identity. However, Geo's husband believes it's due to a relapse of depression causing her to speak incoherently. They argue fiercely, frightening their child. The situation is temporarily at a standstill. Romeo still loves Harry, but in this isolated town, the people find it difficult to accept the modern ideas of the younger generation. Under social pressure, Harry has never dared to confess his feelings, but his feelings grow stronger, and when he thinks of Romeo, he feels lonely. Finally, Harry decides to confront his heart. Geo's mother-in-law is the headmistress of the school. When taking her child to school, she plans to meet her mother-in-law to talk. She accidentally finds a stack of documents. She discovered that the Arcacia Research Institute had been using children from the village as test subjects. Harry was actually a member of this research institute. The locals quickly learned of this and immediately rushed to arrest Harry, intending to carry out their own private justice. By the time Geo arrived, Harry and Romeo had already been beaten badly. Harry was a researcher at the Arcacia Institute. Of course, he knew exactly what they were doing. Since the 16th century, the mountainous region had been famous for its pure anthracite. When Arcacia mined its resources, they discovered another treasure, the Levia bacterium. The institute's director, Bach, had studied this fungus for 4 years and confirmed that the protein it produced had anti-inflammatory properties 1,200 times stronger than corticosteroids. The research institute hoped to use this discovery to revolutionize current medicine. Bach was a very mysterious man who rarely showed himself. Initially, he used sheep as test subjects. Later, Bach had his subordinates contact Harry, asking him to bring patients to the institute for clinical trials. Therefore, Harry had access to the institute and could help Geo infiltrate it. Jaro went to Juliet's memorial cemetery. Not far away, he saw a statue obscured by vines. The hand-carved inscription below read, "Enola, please leave me alone." Jaro searched through all the documents but couldn't find anyone named Enola. But he remembered that many years before Juliet arrived in Paris, a strange woman had come to the village looking for her. That day, the dog that came to his house suddenly started barking wildly. Jaro followed the barking and saw Caleb standing there, but then he disappeared. When they called the mental hospital, the line was always busy. On their way to the hospital with Romeo, they were surprised to see mentally ill patients wandering in the street. They were followers of Caleb. Could he really have escaped? Ida searched her father's backpack and found a bone marrow transplant dataset. Her friend, a biologist, said that the date the DNA sample was sent for comparison matched the date her father arrived in the village. But her father had blood type O, while the sample in the system was type AB. It was clear he had taken someone's DNA but used his own name to send it to the online lab. He seemed to be checking if Ida was genetically compatible with someone already there. But why he would do that, she couldn't understand. While she was thinking, she noticed a VHS tape lying beside her. It was a recording of a school field trip to an anthracite mine. Geo's son, Titus, saw a figure pass by in the adjacent tunnel. Curious, he approached to investigate. The lights in the tunnel flickered continuously. Suddenly, a masked figure appeared. His grandmother heard a scream and ran over, but the tunnel returned to its original silence. These strange events occurred repeatedly, unsettling the institute's research team. While exploring the mine, they heard heavy, eerie breathing. The investigating members all disappeared one by one. Something terrifying seemed to be waiting to rise within the mine. Meanwhile, with Harry's help, Geo sneaked into the hospital and met Director Bach, or rather, Manny. Mani admitted that he had long since changed his name. He had heard Caleb reveal that the anthracite in the village carried a great deal of energy. Now, the research had proven it. But he only implanted the chip in Emma to monitor her vital signs for research purposes and wasn't involved in any murders. Manny's assistant rushed in, frantically reporting that the mining survey team had encountered trouble. They were all attacked by a mysterious creature. What exactly was hidden within? Ida, meanwhile, asked a hospital janitor to find an old TV playing a VHS tape. It contained an interview with Julia, conducted by Solol. At the time, Juliet was pregnant. During filming, her water broke and she gave birth to a baby girl, but she completely rejected the baby, not even looking at her once. In the end, Solol took the baby away. Meanwhile, Jaro and Romeo witnessed the chaos at the psychiatric hospital. Patients fled en masse, and the nurses were unable to control the situation. Ida received a call from a nurse, informing her that Caleb had disappeared. She looked up and saw him entering her father's hospital room. In a panic, she smashed the glass door with her trolley and rushed inside, only to find Caleb gone. In the hospital, Faur returned to her office and found a patient with anthracite smeared on her face, saying, "Those two sisters cannot continue to live. This is the belief of the eccentric cult." But Faur coldly held out her weapon. Looking at the motionless man lying on the ground, she simply said, "I am the true belief." Everything still goes back to 1994. To prevent fires, Solal had given the keys to the room to the garage caretaker. At that time, he had just taken Juliet's daughter, Ida, away. The garage caretaker, curious about Solal's investigation, secretly broke into the workshop. That was the first time she saw Caleb. She immediately fell madly in love with him. By 1996, she became a nurse and intern at a psychiatric hospital. For 30 years, she was by Caleb's side. This man was Faur, but deep down she still hid an even dirtier secret. On the street, Jaro saw Ida looking dazed and lost. From then on, he learned that their true relationship was that of siblings. Solal had been investigating the case for over 30 years and had discovered that Juliet had been raped by Caleb. Solal's purpose on this trip was to find Caleb, hoping to arrange a bone marrow transplant between him and Ida. But Caleb refused the request, citing religious differences. At the same time, a new crisis was about to unfold. Jaro's aunt found a diary and a hidden audio tape in Juliet's old room. She carefully listened to the contents. Every word Juliet uttered was enough to threaten her life. When Jaro returned home, he found the room in chaos. His aunt had suffered a severe head injury and was lying on the ground, lifeless. The police quickly arrived at the scene to take statements. His uncle, enraged, blamed him for everything, claiming that since he began investigating the eccentric cult, things had spiraled out of control. Completely desperate, he kicked him out of the house. Jaro asked the police to investigate the name Enola, but after checking the entire village's resident list, no one with that name was found. With nowhere else to go, Jaro turned to Geo for help. He learned that she was still researching the mine. The place where Emma disappeared that day was less than 100 meters from the mine entrance. Furthermore, the disappearances over the years had all occurred near that area. Adding to that, the Institute's research team being attacked inside the mine led them to suspect that a serial killer might be hiding there. Geo's husband also arrived and recounted an even more terrifying story. Their son, Titus, was still haunted by the figure he had seen in the mine half an hour earlier. He invited his friends to explore the cave. The mine was very deep and there was absolutely no light along the way, so the children didn't dare go near it. Only Titus, driven by curiosity, ventured deeper inside. He didn't find anyone, but on the ground he found a necklace. Engraved on it was Jaro's daughter's name. Not far away, strange noises could be heard. Jaro called Anas, but a police officer answered the phone. Only then did he learn that his wife had died and his daughter was missing. It was very likely that the little girl was in the cave. Who had taken her there? After Ida learned her true identity, she was devastated. She stood on the bridge, wanting to jump. Suddenly, Caleb appeared behind her and told her to help him restore balance to the world. Seeing her unwavering, he pushed her down but managed to pull her back in time. This rekindled Ida's will to live. He told her that the real culprit wasn't targeting her, but Jaro. To save Jaro, she had no choice but to go into the mine. Years ago, Caleb had gone alone to camp near the mine when he accidentally heard strange whispers coming from inside. Unable to contain his curiosity, he ventured deeper inside. The deeper he went, the louder the whispers became, causing him to clutch his head and collapse to the ground in pain. He accidentally discovered anthracite. He announced this discovery to his followers. No one expected this to trigger a series of tragedies. To find his daughter, Jaro, and the female police officer entered the mine. Inside, it was filled with corpses. From their characteristics, it could be determined that these were all people who had gone missing over the years. Geo's suspicions were completely correct. The real culprit had always been hiding in the mine. At that moment, a masked man with a weapon attacked Geo. Luckily, her husband arrived in time to save her. However, she was still seriously injured and forced to retreat to the hospital for treatment. Jaro stayed behind to continue searching for his daughter, but he was pursued by the masked man. Late at night, Romeo arrived at Harry's house. Unexpectedly, Faur turned out to be Harry's biological mother. She enthusiastically invited Romeo to dinner, but her words were full of mockery. She said that he was nothing more than a former motorcycle racer who had fallen on hard times. He said he could only live his whole life in a small village, unable to venture out into the world. He was completely unworthy of someone like Harry, who always saved lives and helped others. Harry sat silently to one side, not saying a word. Romeo was about to leave when he heard a man's voice coming from somewhere in the house. Following the sound, he went to the basement and discovered a video recording of Caleb playing. Beside it was a notebook meticulously detailing everything Faur had done for Caleb. It turned out that she and Caleb had 2 children, a boy and a girl. She had raised them all herself with great difficulty. But watching Caleb's video recordings with her children was when she was happiest. 4 saw Harry as the child of light, free to move around on the surface to save people. Her eldest daughter, however, was the child of darkness, destined to live in the basement. 4 even sent her to live in the mine. Every time Harry saved someone's life, she would take another's. 4 called this balance. Just as Romeo finished reading the contents of the notebook, Harry knocked him unconscious with a hunting rifle. 4 had given Harry full authority to deal with Romeo, but ultimately, Harry couldn't bring himself to do it. He took Romeo to the hospital, where they coincidentally met Jaro, who had just finished his treatment. Harry revealed 4's secret plan of years. The mine was the world of her eldest child, a labyrinthine structure. 4 had never allowed Harry to enter the research institute. The attacker must have gotten too close to the secret chamber, which led to Harry's sister, the masked man, attacking him. It seems that finding him will require returning to the research institute once more. Jaro wakes from his coma. His daughter is lying nearby. 4 has been plotting for a long time. It all stems from her jealousy of Caleb. In every videotape, he mentions Juliet's name and calls her child the sole heir. Therefore, 4 wants to eliminate Juliet's bloodline so that her child becomes the only one. Caleb appears just in time to persuade the masked man to abandon his evil deeds. But 4 has fallen into a near-mad state. She even orders the masked man to attack Caleb. They then shift their target to Ida and Jaro's daughter. The Arcacia Research Institute is also in turmoil. The villagers mistakenly believe that the research team threw the girl into the mine. They gather to protest right outside the institute's gate. The crowd is so enraged that they don't hesitate to attack the police. Therefore, Joe is forced to drive through the crowd, smashing through the gate. The crowd became increasingly chaotic, storming into the research institute and causing destruction. Bach, carrying a barrel of explosives, advanced toward the mine entrance, intending to end it all, including the experiment he had persistently pursued. But many lives remained unsaved within the mine. Under Gio's persuasion, Bach recalled his own childhood when he had been brought into the Ekran's cult. Before being discovered by the police, no one had offered to save him. If he didn't save the innocent people in the mine now, he would be no different from those cold-blooded killers of the past. He slowly released his grip on the remote control. But at that moment, a villager in the crowd rushed forward and shot him. The control device fell and cracked, activating the switch. The bomb still exploded. Gio and the villagers were severely injured. They helped each other leave the research institute. Surviving the ordeal made Gio and her husband cherish their love for each other even more. The police sent people to search the mine. Except for the masked man and 4, everyone else miraculously survived. But the matter didn't end as expected. After being arrested, Harry confessed to all of 4's crimes. However, he still maintained that Jo-san's death in 1994, Julius's death afterward, and even Fatty's recent death were not part of 4's plan. So could there be another culprit in this case? Jaro conducted a DNA test, and the results were a perfect match for Ida. She no longer needed to endure long and painful chemotherapy sessions. She could peacefully enjoy the beauty of this world. But Ida had never intended to accept Caleb as her father, because from childhood to adulthood, the only person who had always been by her side, loving and protecting her, was Solol. On the way home, the two chatted happily. At that moment, a phone rang, warning that someone was trying to contact Ida. All communication was being monitored. They discovered a horrifying secret. From the gen map that Ida had uploaded, it was clear that Caleb was not her biological father. Jaro's uncle put aside all resentment and brought him home. That very night, a ram was having trouble giving birth. His uncle gave him an old shirt to wear temporarily. The two worked together seamlessly to help the ram successfully deliver her lamb. Afterwards, Jaro returned to his mother's room. On the table was an old music player, the kind his aunt used to use. All the truth was stored in the tape recording inside. Before Roxane died, she frequently visited Juliet because she had discovered Juliet's brother's secret. But each time she came, Juliet cruelly chased her away. In the mirror, Jaro was wearing his uncle's old shirt, and above it were the 3 words, Enola. There was no legend about a black virgin. The person Roxane mentioned, the one who came to Juliet's room every night, was actually the man who always stood beside Jaro. Roxane knew the secret, so he killed her. He smeared anthracite on Roxane's face to frame the Ecolin cult. Then, Solol discovered the whole truth and was also hunted down. Jaro's aunt was also murdered by him because she accidentally overheard things she shouldn't have. Juliet loved Jaro more than anything in the world, so she was cruel enough to set fire to the place herself, leaving Jaro with a lifelong psychological trauma. All the things that man did were for one reason. He didn't want to go to prison, but he couldn't escape his crimes. The film ends here. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and see you again.